Hey everyone, I'm Yasmin, and I've got a story to share about my mother-in-law, Jessica. She's quite the character, let me tell you. My husband, Key, thought it would be a good idea to share this story here because, well, he enjoys reading these kinds of tales sometimes. And trust me, it's not surprising considering his mother's antics. He's been dealing with her craziness since day one. He was her first target, after all. Let me start from the beginning. Key grew up with Jessica, who was once married to his dad. Unfortunately, that didn't last long, and his dad made a run for it soon after Key was born. He couldn't handle Jessica's wild ways. Then came Jessica's next romantic misadventure with a man who abandoned Key, leaving his dad to pay child support until he decided to cut ties altogether. I've never met the guy, and honestly, I have no desire to. Jessica claims she single-handedly raised Key, but the truth is far from that. She used him as a cash cow, milking his family for as long as she could. When that well dried up, she begrudgingly got a job, but still had her hand out for money whenever she pleased. And when Key hit his teens, she put him to work, pocketing all his earnings until he turned 18. Key knew he needed to escape the cycle, so he took out loans and secured a scholarship to get into college, where we met. From the get-go, he'd regale me with horror stories about his mother, and I couldn't help but feel enraged on his behalf. I'd often ask him why he still maintained contact with her, but his answer was always the same. He felt obligated due to his upbringing under her narcissistic reign. I urged him to seek help, to break free from her manipulative grasp, and eventually he agreed. With some coaxing and love, I managed to get him started on therapy, using my own savings to cover the costs. It was a tough journey, but he began to find his footing and started to push back against his mother's demands. Of course, Jessica didn't take kindly to this newfound independence. She saw me as the villain, accusing me of manipulating Key against her. She couldn't see that it was her own actions pushing him away. Despite her protests, Key stood by me, defending my actions and asserting his own boundaries. Therapy worked wonders for Key, and as time passed, he grew stronger, more assertive. Jessica, on the other hand, remained stubbornly stuck in her ways. Fast forward a few years, and Key and I have graduated college and tied the knot, leaving Jessica's drama in the rearview mirror. Both of us landed solid jobs, the result of our hard work during college. We scrimped and saved, opting for a modest backyard wedding at my parents' place to stash away funds for a future home. Meanwhile, Jessica's life took a turn for the worse as she married Frank, a disrespectful man who couldn't hold down a job. Frank's freeloadery continued as Jessica incessantly badgered Key for money until he reluctantly agreed to foot the bill for an apartment. She seemed content with the arrangement until news of our house purchase reached her ears. Suddenly, she was all smiles, congratulating us on our new digs before dropping a bombshell. She and Frank expected to move in. Needless to say, I was taken aback. "Excuse me? What are you talking about?" I countered. But Jessica remained resolute, insisting that they were moving in with us. I had to set the record straight. "Jessica, we jointly bought this house. I contribute too. And by the way, I don't live here rent-free like you do in the apartment. Key covers your rent." Jessica's response was predictably defensive. "Watch your mouth, Yasmin. I won't tolerate disrespect." But I stood my ground. "I have a right to speak, Jessica. This concerns my home as much as it does Key's." I emphasized that neither she nor Frank would be moving in. "That's for my son to decide, and he knows it's not his obligation to house you. I'm already taking care of you, Mom." Jessica wasn't having it. "Keith, you owe me," she insisted. "You need to take responsibility for your mother." But Key remained firm. "Neither of you will be getting a copy of our keys. This conversation is over." You'd think that would be the end of it. Well, the drama didn't end there. For days on end, Frank and Jessica bombarded us with calls, trying to guilt-trip us into letting them move in. Jessica even went as far as hurling insults at me, accusing me of manipulating Key. At first, it was almost comical, but soon it became unbearable. Frustrated with their persistence, Key decided to pay them a visit at their apartment to reiterate that they wouldn't be moving in. We thought our message had finally gotten through when the calls stopped. Problem solved, or so we thought. But about a month after settling into our new home, we were looking forward to a well-deserved vacation we'd been saving up for. It was meant to be a peaceful getaway by the beach, just the two of us. We switched off, ready to unwind. But as evening fell, things took a shocking turn. A notification from our Ring camera system alerted me to activity at our front door. We'd installed the cameras before leaving, just in case. I couldn't imagine who would be showing up uninvited, considering our neighborhood was typically quiet. Curious, I checked the live feed on my phone, only to be met with a sight that left me speechless. There on the screen was Jessica and Frank hauling bags of clothes into our home. They'd somehow gained access and were setting up camp in our guest room, with Jessica even making herself at home in the kitchen. I was livid and knew I had to get Key on the line immediately. "Keith, we need to talk. Something's happened," I said urgently, knowing I had to break the news to him. Despite being on vacation, this couldn't wait. Key's initial annoyance quickly turned to shock as he watched the footage. His expression hardened. "Leave it to my mother to surprise me in the worst possible way," he muttered, clearly furious. It was crystal clear. Jessica had completely disregarded our boundaries, and we made it abundantly clear that day that she would not be living with us. I'm baffled as to how they got their hands on our house keys. It's mind-boggling. Frank's sleazy nature makes me worry he might have copied our keys without us knowing. Changing the locks seems like the only solution to ensure they can't just barge in whenever they please. But as for the current problem, I'm leaning towards involving the authorities. What they're doing is not only illegal, but also downright frightening. Trusting them anymore feels impossible. Calling the cops and cutting off contact might be the best course of action. I gave Key some time to mull over the idea, seeing the furrowed lines on his forehead as he weighed our options. Surprisingly, his response was more resolute than I anticipated. "Let's do it," he said firmly. I couldn't help but ask, "Are you sure about this?" There's no turning back once we involve the police. But Key was steadfast. They've betrayed my trust one too many times. There have to be consequences. I pressed further, asking if he'd be willing to cut off contact with them as well. "Of course," he replied, regret lacing his words. "I should have done it ages ago. It's time to distance myself from them." With Key on board, we formulated a plan. But first, he decided to give his mother a final warning. Maybe, just maybe, she'd come to her senses. Key called her, but she didn't pick up at first. Through the security cameras, we could see her and Frank in a huddle, likely discussing our call. When she finally answered, we put it on speaker so Frank could hear too. "Hey, Keith, how's the vacation?" she asked, feigning ignorance. But I wasn't having it. "Breaking into our house isn't something to brush off, Jessica," I interjected. There was a tense silence on her end, and she exchanged a glance with Frank, who seemed adept at deception and manipulation. It was evident that Jessica had anticipated this confrontation, likely expecting her husband, Frank, to come up with some sort of defense. She immediately accused me of being crazy and demanded Key to silence me. But Key wouldn't stand for it. "Don't talk to my wife like that," he asserted. Jessica's tone turned accusatory, claiming we were spying on them with cameras both inside and outside the house. She seemed offended by our intrusion into their privacy, which struck me as ironic given her own invasion of ours. Unsure if she was deflecting or genuinely offended, I couldn't help but retort, "That's rich coming from you, Jessica. You broke into our home against our wishes." But Jessica remained defiant, insisting that as Key's mother, she had a right to be there. Key, however, stood his ground, reminding her of the apartment he already provided for her. Their presence in our home was unwelcome, and we demanded answers about how they obtained the keys. Frank's admission confirmed our suspicions. "I made a copy of your keys," he confessed brazenly. Enraged, Key rebuked him, but Frank asserted his authority as Key's stepfather. The tension escalated as Key challenged Frank's actions. labeling them as forgery and illegal. Jessica attempted to justify Frank's actions, claiming a mother should have access to her son's home for emergencies. But her flimsy excuse didn't hold water. We gave them an ultimatum: leave within the hour or we'd involve the authorities. Their panic was palpable as they huddled together, whispering frantically. Through the cameras, we could see their fear-stricken faces, realizing the consequences of their actions. In their final attempt to assert control, Frank and Jessica disregarded our ultimatum and refused to leave. They dismissed my warnings, claiming the house belonged solely to Key and that I had no authority. But we stood firm, reminding them that it was our home too, and we wanted them out before involving the police. As the hour passed, we observed them through the surveillance cameras, seeing Jessica unpacking her bags defiantly. Anger boiled within us, but we refused to engage further, recognizing that reasoning with their entitled mindset was futile. When we called the police, they arrived promptly, and we watched as they confronted Jessica and Frank at our doorstep. The officers explained the situation, and Jessica and Frank attempted to feign confusion. But when confronted with the evidence, they changed their tune, pleading with Key to let them stay. But Key remained resolute, refusing to cave in to their manipulation. Despite their pleas and excuses, he demanded they leave immediately. However, Jessica's revelation left us dumbfounded. She had canceled their lease and sold their furniture, expecting us to house them. Key's anger reached its peak upon hearing this betrayal. He refused to entertain her excuses, insisting they vacate his house. Despite Jessica's desperate pleas, Key stood firm, unwilling to compromise his boundaries. But Jessica continued to plead, appealing to Key's sense of familial duty. "Do you want your mother to be homeless? Mom, since you've made yourself homeless by canceling your lease, I won't be giving you any more rent money. I'm done," Key declared firmly, unmoved by Jessica's tears and pleas. Despite her attempts to guilt-trip us, we stood our ground, refusing to entertain her manipulative tactics. Both Key and I were furious at their audacity and crossed boundaries. We shouted at them and ended the call, immediately blocking their numbers. The cops ensured that Jessica and Frank left our house, and we arranged for a trusted friend to house sit until our return. We also had the locks changed for added security. Frank and Jessica's departure marked the beginning of their downward spiral. They tried to garner support from relatives, but no one sided with them, knowing Jessica's history of drama. They attempted to harass us with new phone numbers, but failed to gain any traction. During our vacation, we kept our phones off, only checking for emergencies once a day. Despite their persistent attempts to intrude, our friends successfully thwarted their efforts by threatening to involve the authorities. Upon our return, we learned that Frank had left Jessica because she could no longer house and support him for free. Desperate, Jessica begged Key for help, finally realizing the consequences of her actions. However, Key remained steadfast in his decision to maintain no contact. Recently, we heard from family that Jessica now lives in a trailer and works at a retail store, with retirement nowhere in sight. It's a stark reminder of the consequences of her entitled behavior.